Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today we begin with a story, and it's one that occurs in Hyattsville, New York in 1848. It is a true story, of course, about the appearance of a spirit in a house. And the spirit was not an apparition, it had no physical manifestation, but rather a sound, a rapping sound throughout the house that suggested that a spirit had something to tell the two little girls who had moved into the house with their parents. The reason this story is important is because this ghostly sound began a movement called spiritualism, which Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes, would later popularize through his speeches throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. And this spiritualist belief essentially thought that the personality would remain after death, and that there were ways to communicate with that personality in a spiritualist practice with things like seances, table tilting, ectoplasm, automatic writing. What else? Photographs, where you would develop the film and see a spirit in the photograph after you had developed it. So this began with these two little girls who were able to make contact with a spirit in Hyattsville in 1848. But it really took off following the Spanish flu, which killed an estimated 50 million people, and offered or demanded a new way for people to grieve, to comfort themselves as they faced this kind of mass death event. So we have those different things coming into play here. We have the need to grieve and to have hope that something existed after death. But there was also a great deal of scientific exploration occurring around this time, particularly around electricity, X-rays, radio waves. All of these things have in common the fact that they are invisible, that there are invisible forces that the scientists are now discovering and proving as true. So the concept that there is something invisible inside us that can communicate outside of us, much like an X-ray or much like a radio wave, became popularized. And that was something that led to, in a large portion, the spiritualist movement, which was heavily based on science. That's how someone like Arthur Conan Doyle could believe in it when he believed himself to be an incredibly rational, scientific man. So all of that begins 1848 in Hyattsville, New York, in John D. Fox's farmhouse. So let me get my notes. Okay, here we go. John D. Fox's farmhouse was disturbed by unexplained rapping at night. So little rapping sounds at night. He had two daughters, and the youngest, Kate, made contact in code. She uses a series of questions in order to contact this spirit that is so bothering them at night. She says, "Can you count to 10, Mr. Splitfoot?" Mr. Splitfoot is his name. And so she asks this Mr. Splitfoot if he can count to 10. And of course, Mr. Splitfoot raps out 10 times. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And again she asks, "Mr. Splitfoot, how old are we?" And then he raps out their ages. So I don't know their ages, but I think it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think it's like 9. They're quite young. then she says, "Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do." She snaps her fingers 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And Mr. Splitfoot goes, 1, 2, 3. And then she asks, "Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do." She doesn't make any sound with her fingers, and Mr. Splitfoot responds. And so she discovers, and she tells her mother, that he can see as well as hear. So the spiritual entity is able to perceive both visually and orally. This is shocking to everyone, of course. And the girls soon work out a code so that he can communicate with them with rapping. This was a common Victorian parlor game, table tapping, where everyone would sit round a table, also table tilting. And together you would contact the spirits, and the table would tilt to give answers to questions, or it would rap, much like a Ouija board, right? These were Victorian parlor games used to entertain people, but also to communicate with spirits. Now, these 2 girls realized, after working out this code, that Mr. Splitfoot was in fact a man who had been murdered in the house and buried in the cellar 5 years prior. And so naturally, they take this skill, this medium capacity or the capability to contact these spirits on the road. And it's then that spiritualism really takes off, because there is scientific, concrete proof in the mind of people that spirits do exist. How else could these girls discover these things and speak to this entity if it were not possible that spirits outlive the body? And so they become famous performing their seances all over the country to audiences. Audiences come in. They could be charlatans, and certainly every generation has its own group of charlatans. But a lot of people, including someone like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, believes that they are not. In their adulthood, however, the girls did descend into alcoholism, and though Margaret, or Maggie, the oldest daughter, did marry wealthy, her husband wanted her to stop these medium session seances. He wanted her to stop them, and he wanted her to join the Catholic Church. There is a very close connection between spiritualism and the Catholic Church, which we'll go into when we discuss Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But he wanted her to join the Catholic Church, and she did. And she convinced her sister, Kate, to also remove herself from the seance. And they really could, because they married wealthy. And those marriages allowed them to stop making their money through seances. So they joined the Roman Catholic Church, and Kate actually says at the seances that she felt as if she were contacting Satan or the devil himself whenever she spoke to Mr. Splitfoot or other spirits. And we know from horror films that it's quite possible that spirits can masquerade as humans when they are in fact something far more nefarious and not human. But Margaret's husband dies, and with him goes her affluence. So Maggie and Kate go back to doing seances, and it is in their older age, or their middle age, that they take $1,500 from a magazine to admit that they were frauds. And the way they said that they did it, that they were charlatans essentially, is that when they talked to Mr. Splitfoot, they had taught themselves how to crack their knuckles, right? So like that. How to crack their knuckles without being seen under the table. And so when they would speak to Mr. Splitfoot, they would crack their toes or their ankles to make the responses. Now, there are some that believe they admitted to being charlatans because they needed money, and $1,500 in the 1800s, quite a bit of money. But there are others who think they were in fact charlatans. When the house in Hydesville, however, was inspected, a false wall in the cellar collapsed, and in the cellar were remains. So some believe that, in fact, whoever Mr. Splitfoot was in fact a man, a peddler of sorts, who was buried in the walls, and Mr. Splitfoot was real and had communicated with them. Others believe that those were chicken bones placed there as a practical joke, and there was no formal inquisition or no formal investigation of what they found in that house. So we'll never really know if the girls were in fact the frauds that they said they were, or if they were just in desperate need of money. We do know that there were very many very rational, very scientific men who believed 100% in their legitimacy. And they also believed in a great deal of other scientific proof that the spirit realm existed and could communicate with mediums in seances or perfect conditions. So what we will look at today is a book about Winnipeg. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle described Winnipeg in Canada as one of the most active spiritual locations in the world. He said there was a lot of spiritual energy going on in Winnipeg, and it kind of became one of the centers of spiritual activity. And so this book is called The Art of Ectoplasm. And we'll go into what ectoplasm is in a moment. But this book here has pictures of a medium right here. This would be the Hamiltons medium. The Hamiltons were a couple in Winnipeg who performed over 700 seances. And they recorded all of them in photographs. So you can see here, this is their medium. It was a Scottish maid, and she's made a physical manifestation of a hand, and this is made in what is called ectoplasm. All right. So we're going to look at a lot of different pictures from this book. They're a little terrifying, and I'll put the camera in a different spot so you can actually see them when we turn around to look at the pictures. But for now, let's discuss Arthur Conan Doyle, because he was, of course, one of the most rational men. I mean, he wrote Sherlock Holmes, who believed only in things that could be scientifically proven. He believed only in what you could perceive. And so it really is surprising that a man who would create Sherlock Holmes would believe in ghosts, essentially. Now, they weren't called ghosts. Ghosts were too silly a term. They were called manifestations, which is a more scientific term, because spiritualism was, odd enough, opposite as to what it sounds. Spiritualism was a scientific movement driven in a large part by highly scientific men. So let's talk about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle now. Get out my notebook here. I love the sound of the notebook, so I'll try and use it as much as I can, but sometimes I can't. So he was born in 1859 in Scotland to an extremely Catholic family. And right away, growing up, he did not like Catholicism because he just simply couldn't believe in it. There was no power in his mind that could rationalize the things that Catholics believed. The first was papal infallibility. He did not believe that that was possible or that it made any sense. He also could not believe in the Immaculate Conception. And most of all, he did not believe that non-believers would be eternally damned by their lack of belief, essentially. He did not believe that there was eternal damnation for non-believers. So a big part of his disgust with Catholicism was its evangelizing of others, or its belief that those who are not a part of the faith are not a part of the saved. And so you'll notice that spiritualism is really absent of that quality. You don't need to convince anyone to be a spiritualist. And those who are not spiritualists are not doomed, right? It exists on its own, and it really has to prove its own existence. And so in that way, it is very close to a kind of, shall we call it like primitive Christianity based on miracles. And far less like the institution that it is today. So miracles are essential, but miracles that are observable, right? You're not just believing a story, you need to actually see it. And that was very, very important to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So that is why he didn't like Catholicism. So he's searching for a new religion. And he discovered Mormonism and he discovered spiritualism. Both originated kind of at the same time and have a similar belief system, so I won't go into that because I don't fully understand it. But he disliked Mormonism because it had some of the same issues as Christianity, which is namely that Mormons believe that if you're not Mormon, you're not one of the saved. So it still had that kind of in and out sense, kind of cultish belief that if you're not part of this group, then you're doomed, right? So he didn't like that. And he also didn't like that it wasn't proven by foundational experiments, repeatable experiments that were run in controlled environments. He really wanted the scientific method to be applied to these religions, and Mormonism could not undergo that. Okay. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said, "Never will I accept anything that cannot be proved to me. The evils of religion have all come from accepting things that cannot be proved." To break down the barrier of death, he said, is his one goal. It is to found the great religion of the future. And that is, to him, spiritualism. Okay? Suggesting a permeable boundary between life and death, which does what religion so often, what religion really does for people, which is gives them calm, make them feel calm about the fact that we die, right? That is one of religion's main purposes, is like to, what am I trying to say? Comfort us in the face of death and the death of our loved ones. Okay. Now, one of the men who was doing this work, men and women, were doing this work to break down that barrier between life and death and to prove that that barrier was permeable, were the Hamiltons in Winnipeg. And again, they did over 700 seances in a very, very controlled environment. So I'll go over the Hamiltons in a moment. I first want to figure out or explain to you some of the scientific principles that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would look to in order to prove the truthfulness of spiritualism. So I'll turn now to some of the terms. Okay. I said before that spiritualism emerged at the same time that a great deal of really foundational, groundbreaking scientific discoveries were being made, like Einstein's discovery of light, or discovery relating to light, namely the ways that it traveled. And so we'll think about that now, how the scientific merges with the superstitious, or the pseudoscientific. Now, this was not believed to be pseudoscientific necessarily at the time. It was completely rational, if you think about it, that the kinds of invisible forces that objects could produce, like magnets or whatever, could exist with us too. I mean, it's not a great jump, not a great logical jump to take, that we might also possess these kinds of invisible forces inside our bodies, forces we cannot see and that we have yet to discover. Okay. So, first was the ether theory, related to a theory of light. It was originally believed that life needed to travel through something. It couldn't just travel through nothing, and that there was a kind of luminiferous, which is such a word, luminiferous. There's a luminiferous essence. So there's a kind of luminiferous essence that the light in the world travels through. Now Einstein later discovered that light doesn't travel through like a substance, but we believed at one point that it did. And so this quickly transitioned into the ether theory, which is that there is a subtle energy layer connected to every body, kind of like an aura, I guess. And this is what thoughts could travel through, right? So we could communicate through a kind of psychic ether. And this is how psychics or telepathic conversations would occur, right? Or telekinesis, even. Telekinesis would be something experimented with table tipping, right? That parlor game I talked about, where you roll your hands on the table and the table will move. And there's photographic evidence from the Hamiltons that a table literally just like flew up in the air and went up to this corner of the ceiling. There's a picture of it, so I don't know. But that's that. There is the biological vitalism, which says that all of us have some sort of energy or force, an intelligent force that exists that is not present in objects. And so there's something special, unique about us. And then finally there is ectoplasm, which is really, really important because it is the central focus of the Winnipeg photographs taken by the Hamiltons, and it's in this book compiled here. I'm going to read you a few quotes about ectoplasm, and then I'm going to turn the camera around and we're going to look at photographic photographic captures of events where ectoplasm is released by a medium. So ectoplasm is a kind of biological secretion almost. It sounds a little gross, but I guess that's what it is. And it's believed that mediums, or psychics, or whatever, were able to excrete this kind of vital energy or fluid. It was called that. It was an animal magnetism, a nervous force. I mean, all different types of words. And ectoplasm was the transformation of that vital force into a material. Okay, so the taking of something metaphysical and turning it into the physical, making that invisible force they believed existed visible, essentially. And so the medium's vital force would empty from her. Essentially, the cells would project their plasma to create a barely visible rod. And that very barely visible rod could, for instance, move tables, right? It was a kind of the structural force of telekinesis. There was something actually coming from a medium that was moving things. And so this goes along with ectoplasm. Essentially, a medium is projecting her plasma from her cells into the room as some sort of structure. And it was spirit guides who would often prompt this ectoplasmic release. So they would be spirits that would join the medium, and they were named, right? For the Hamiltons, the spirit guide was named William or Will. And they would arrive and they would create the ectoplasm. And this one is actually a joke, this picture here. Because Will, the spirit guide, who is the dead brother of the Hamilton's friend, would appear at these seances. And it was a day when nothing much was happening, and he said, I'm not going to let Mr. Hamilton be disappointed by our seance. I'm going to create something very silly. And he manifested through the medium this perfect gloved hand. It looks kind of like plaster of Paris, and it was photographed. And so the people at the seance essentially said after, "Oh, it's Will being funny again. That's his wonderful sense of humor." So there wasn't a whole lot of fear surrounding these ectoplasmic events or the spirit guides that appeared. There are other spirit guides. One in here named Katie King, who is a spirit guide, and she's very beautiful. Let me see if it will focus on her face. There you go. This is Katie King, a spirit guide. So these would appear, and they would essentially run sessions through the medium. Okay. So, quotes about ectoplasm, so we kind of fully understand what it is, on page 65. So let me go there. There are more photographs of the ectoplasm there. You can see, but I'll show them to you in a second. So this is from a man named Richard. He was allegedly the man who coined the word ectoplasm, and he said, "The word ectoplasm, which I invented for the experiments with Eusapia, seems entirely justified. The ectoplasm is a kind of gelatinous protoplasm, formless at first, that exudes from the body of the medium and takes form later. This embryogenesis of materializations shows clearly on nearly all the photographs. In the early stages, there are always white veils and milky patches, and the faces, fingers and drawings are formed little by little in the midst of this kind of gelatinous paste that resembles moist and sticky muslin. Now, in these ectoplasmic forms, oftentimes would appear faces, and Arthur Conan Doyle's face actually appeared in one of Dr. Hamilton's photographs, because, again, Arthur Conan Doyle said, "When I die, I will appear to you in your seances," and he did, and the picture's in here, and I'll show it to you. And then he also wrote, "Observations show this ectoplasm is an amorphous substance which either may be solid or vaporous. Then, usually, very soon, the formless substance becomes organic. It condenses and forms appear which, when the process is complete, have all the anatomical and physiological characteristics of biological life. The ectoplasm has become a living being or a fractional part of a living being, but is always closely connected to the body of the medium into which it is absorbed by the end of the experiment." So that is ectoplasm, and that's what these photographs really were of. So who were the Hamiltons? The Hamiltons were highly scientific people and very respected scientific people. Mr. Hamilton was a doctor, and his wife was a nurse. And here. Yep. So Thomas Glendenning Hamilton was the doctor, and his wife was Lillian Hamilton, who was a nurse. So they're both very invested in science and biology, and they were well respected in the medical community. And so these were not frauds, right? People believed that they were respected. Now, the reason they became so interested in spiritualism is probably due to the Spanish flu or the influenza pandemic, the most deadly pandemic, which killed over 50 million people, maybe more. I mean, obviously records weren't excellent back then. It killed their son, Arthur, when he was 3. He was one of two twins, and so they grieved immensely. They also, being medical professionals, witnessed an extraordinary amount of death. And so in order to cope with that experience, they began to use mediums to attempt to reach Arthur. And one of their mediums, Elizabeth Poole, or Elizabeth M, as she is called in the documents, was able to reach him multiple times. And so really this spiritualist movement came out of the 20th century's large death events. World War I, the Spanish flu, all of these experiences required people to find a way to believe that something was after death, so they could get past the grief of losing so many people. Of her psychical research, Lillian wrote that a new world had opened up, a world of belief that helped me part with Arthur without tears and with an inner joy that one of my beloveds was safely over and ready for otherworld evolutionary endeavors. So you can hear in all of these passages in biological terms, a highly scientific lexicon, which really shows how desperate people were to prove that this was real, that this was not some made-up thing that kooks would believe in, but rather it was something real, right? And so that got them into this process. So they put together a seance room in the second story of the house, and it was super, super locked down. And they also found 2 mediums, and so I'll go over them first. These 2 mediums will appear in all the pictures from their seance room. And it was Lillian Hamilton who was most engaged with these mediums. The first was Elizabeth Poole. She was a nursemaid for the family, and she was the first to contact Arthur. And she was a Scottish immigrant of lower class, completely illiterate. So it's important to note that people chosen as mediums were women, mostly. And they were usually lower class women, often immigrants. And this was because they were prized for their easy malleability. So they were believed to be more malleable, probably because they were in the hands of very wealthy people, wealthy doctor. And so they were malleable to empirical pursuits. Compliant, uneducated women of a low social rank were prized for these experiments. So it really does fall into some of the ethical, scientific problems that the 20th century and today still see. But Elizabeth Poole was a nursemaid, and she was beloved by the family. The children just spoke of her quite well when they were older. And she was a medium in over 400 seances. Mary Marshall was the next medium. She was able to produce ectoplasm, Elizabeth Poole, or Elizabeth M, as she is referred to, was not able to produce any ectoplasm. She could only do automatic writing, trances, table tipping, rapping, so on. So she joined in 1928, while Elizabeth Poole had been working for them from the 1920s after Arthur's death in 1919. And she was another working class Scottish woman who could produce, as I said, ectoplasm. And she was guided by Walter. I spoke incorrectly in the beginning of the video, and I said that her spiritual guide was Will. It's not as Walter. He was a spirit of the dead friend who would often join them. This spirit is called the spirit of control. Okay, that was controlling the seance. Now, Lillian Hamilton, who organized these seances, she chose the clothes that these women would wear. She monitored the washing and physical examination of the bodies of the mediums before the seance, if there would be any physical manifestations involved. She would monitor heart rate and breathing during seances to ensure that when they were in trances they were safe. And the seances, or the mediums, were dressed in black shift dresses and silk house coats or black house dresses or silk coats and bloomers in a very minimalist style. So you'll see here, if you look at the pictures, the very minimalist dress, right, to show up perfectly on the photographs, because Dr. Hamilton was a really good photographer. He had his own darkroom, and he was very interested in developing all of his photographs himself. So, yeah, okay. I'm now going to turn the camera around, and we're actually going to look at some pictures of this. So if you made it this far, now we actually get to look at it. Because there's some really fascinating pictures of the stuff, and you can decide for yourself if you think it's real or not. All right, so I'm going to turn it around and we'll take a look. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to change this a little bit. We're just going to adjust this just a bit. In there. Okay, so the first thing we have is a bit of their notes. So they would type up their notes like these nice little typewriters. Photographs of the levitated table here and displayed were secured over a period of 6 years, 1921 to 1927 inclusive, during investigation of the physical phenomena exhibited by the medium Elizabeth M. So that's Elizabeth Poole, remember. These manifestations still all occurred in the experimenter's own home, in a room set apart for the purposes of metaphysic research, and to that, and especially prepared and equipped. All equipment, electrical and photographic, was prepared and installed by him or under his personal supervision. The medium was under his personal scrutiny from the start to finish of each and every experiment. Special verifiers were often present, and lastly, all the photographs were taken, developed, and printed by him. He is therefore in a position to state that he knows the phenomena herein recorded to be the product of genuine telekinetic force. Many hundreds of these levitations have been witnessed, some 30 have been photographed. Okay, so we will now look at a diagram of that scientific room he described. So let's go, just make sure it's focused, to page 51 here. This is a diagram of the room. It's highly scientific, sort of. It's not terribly, but so you have your tables, right? Your chairs around the table, and these are the people that attend these seances. Then you have a gramophone, cupboard, hallway. Get closer so you can actually see. Let's see if we'll get closer. So electrical controls, stuff like that. And you have all of these different places where the cameras are. And so let's now look at what that camera system looks like, because this is the kind of scientific epicenter of such places. Right here, this picture of the cameras. So it's the view of the seance room is seen from the cabinet. And so you have flashlight devices. You have 3 push buttons to start the camera flash. You have your chairs there, but you see all these very, very old cameras that in this seance room that he described in the earlier page. Sorry, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. In the early page for the table tilting. And those cameras were able to capture the table tilting. I'll show you. Oops, I went too far. Sorry. Right here is an image of the table flying up through the telekinetic power of Elizabeth M. And there she is with her hands on the table, and then it flies up through the spirits, or the physical manifestation of her vital force. Okay, so let's now look at a few more pictures. We can look at the family, the Hamilton family. Just give me a moment. I think I'll go a bit further. There we go. This is the little boy Arthur that started it all when he died. Okay. This was the twins, Arthur and another I can't remember the name of. He's the one who died of the Spanish flu and caused them to begin their investigations. There they are again, and here is the family, the children of the family. Okay, in Winnipeg, Canada. But now let's look at a few random pictures. Here is a medium excreting ectoplasm. So you can see it's almost like smoke rising from her face at these tables. I want to find a picture that is a representation of what it looks like from above the seance room, but we'll get there. This is what I spoke of before, which was the appearance of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's face in the ectoplasm. He appeared, I think, twice. So this is the first one. And this is probably Mary, but I'm not sure which medium it was. But the ectoplasm would reveal faces. Though it is so easy to see how such a thing would be faked. You just put, very simply, you combine the two, sorry, I got some light there. You combine the two, the film before you develop it, you cut it up. So it would be very easy to do this if you were to fake it. Putting a lot of trust in this man, this doctor, to have not told a lie. Let's look. Here is a view of what the seance room really looks like. And all those cameras would be behind. But let's keep on going. You can see how these pictures might have inspired horror films. A lot of these are very familiar images. Didn't do a very good job with my markings, how I mark my pages. Here's another table turning photograph. You see here, but we won't look at that one. More cameras. Let me try and find what this one is. More table turning. And this one. More table turning. Here we go. This is where we get to the ectoplasm excretions. As you can see, it almost looks like silly putty coming out of her mouth and falling, not silly putty, crazy string coming out of her mouth and falling on the table. This is the first ectoplasm photographed in Canada. So those are one of the first pictures taken of it. There is something abusive about this process to me. When you see how incapacitated these mediums are, it really is so disturbing to me when you think about how they were lower class women chosen for their malleability. Because you can really see how it seems they're taken advantage of. Here's an image of what the room looks like from above. You have again the incapacitated medium, and everyone is just looking on. It's a really disturbing image of the woman who just appears drugged, and how unaware she is. And here you have one that's truly a little disturbing, where the medium is lying on a bed and everyone's standing around her. You can see a little bit better up here, watching her. She's excreting this ectoplasm here. There's a little arrow pointing to the ectoplasm, which to me looks like gauze, but not gauze, but taffeta almost. And they're all standing around her in, as you can see, the outfit that Lillian would have picked for her. So it's odd. She's being dressed by this woman. She's poor. She's brought into the house of wealthy doctors. She's forced to dress a certain way, and then she's kind of observed excreting this thing, which we don't even know is real. It's just really, really disturbing to me. Probably more disturbing than the supernatural aspects is that power imbalance. Again, you see here kind of everyone, the women incapacitated and the men observing. Really does feel just odd to me. And then here we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle writing for Sherlock fans. This is a note he wrote thanking the Hamiltons for inviting him to one of their seances and introducing him to their research. He really believed in them. Here is a poster of people trying to expose spiritualism as a lie. You Are in Danger is a really good title, because you don't know who's in danger, the medium or the people seeing the ghost. It was as a movie, kind of like that. I'm gonna keep that for later. I'm gonna look into that more later. Okay. Here is again our kind of sequence of negatives. Obviously developed, but selected cinematograph pictures of July 13th, 1913, which is intended to show the widening and narrowing of the substance and its recession into the mouth. So it comes out and then it goes back in. As you can see here. Okay. we have here another picture of a seance there. Have a drink. And then, did we look at all the good ones? I think so. There are so many of them. Just like, again, pictures from 700 seances means there's just countless. Alright, I'm hearing some noise in the house, so I think I'll end this video here. Thank you so much for watching. This is a fascinating book. I will put it in the description in case you want to buy it. And thank you so much for joining me. I hope you learned a lot and that you're nice and rested. Alright, bye-bye everyone.